Hi, my name's Joe Cernik. I'm a member of the faculty here at Lindenwood University in St. Charles, Missouri. Now, this is a show called Insight, and we usually discuss books on politics, both domestically and internationally, sometimes historical books that provide some insight into the present, sometimes broader atmospheric books that sort of put some political issues into a broader trend or development. We're looking at a book that probably addresses foreign affairs today. I'm just saying probably because it sort of is taking place within the United States. The book is written by T.J. Waters. He is a former consultant on intelligence issues, and then he'll leave the CIA eventually and start his own work with the Defense Department on intelligence issues. And the title of his book is called Class 11, My Story Inside the CIA's First Post-9/11 Spy Class. Now, joining me on the show today are three Lindenwood University students. To my immediate right is Sonja Blair. To Sonja's right is Moses Milan. And to Moses' right is Jessie, Basler. So I wanted to read an opening quote from the book, get a sense of where the author's coming from, and then we'll jump into a discussion about the book. The author writes, "We are the CIA's clandestine service training program, Class 11. We are the volunteers who entered the CIA after the September 11th attacks, the largest training class in CIA history. This isn't a story about tuxedos, martinis, or fancy gadgets. This is the real world of espionage. But it isn't exclusively about trade class. It's about people, a group of people who took dramatic turns from careers and families to answer a nation's call. More than 150,000 people applied to the Central Intelligence Agency in the weeks following the attacks. The agency typically accepts less than 0.1% of the applications received. After September 11th, the CIA brought in retirees and reassigned existing staff from other offices to handle the incredible mountain of applicants. But these weren't 20-year-olds with no applicable skills. These were lawyers, consultants, investment bankers, scientists, and a myriad of other professionals. Terrorism was no longer something that happened elsewhere. It now had a local face, a local presence."
Well, and I think 9/11 was a terrifying and horrible situation, but in light of the situation, I think it was very interesting that there were broad professions that wanted to step up to the plate, like the fact that lawyers and scientists and investment bankers were interested in becoming a part of the CIA was really interesting to me, because before 9/11 happened, I don't think they would want to do something like that, but I feel like they felt that they had to come together and do something so this type of situation would never happen again.
Right. I think one of the big takeaways from this period in time, as far as the recruitment goes, is the diversity of the people that were brought into the CIA. And that's not for political reasons. That's for the fact that when you have CIA operatives on the ground, they've got to blend into where they're at. So you need people of different ethnicities, different backgrounds. And I think the book did a great job of explaining how people came from all walks of life, all racial backgrounds, all genders, to do their part in a real tragic time.
You know, following the chaotic sadness after 9/11, I think a lot of people were drawn to do something, and this was the first thing that popped into their head. There was a big explosion of patriotism, of protection of our country, and fear. And once we have that situation that we've rarely had in the United States, we rarely have these terrorist attacks that are more frequent on the other countries, I think that kind of shocked people into wanting to take a stand. And now, as the author said, it's a local issue. It was something that hit in the backyard of our own homes. And for us, when people happen to feel threatened in our own countries, we tend to have more patriotism. We feel more obligated to excel in issues like this and go into these different kind of organizations.
Yeah, one of the people that was recruited in addition to bankers and consultants is they refer to a famous NFL football player. He doesn't say who he is, but he does say that everybody knew who he was. So I thought that was odd. Wonder what skills he had bringing to the table besides having played football. So when he now gets in, basically the book is the story about preparation for assignments overseas, and so everything takes place in this training program. And so that's what you're really focusing on. And after he talks about a lie detector test, and he doesn't really say a great deal about the process of accepting. It's more like once he's in, then we begin the process from there.
Yeah, they went in depth on how you get into the CIA. Like, people had to go through multiple different interviews. Some of them were through phone, some of them in person. They were interviewed by a different person each time. And also they had to go through different type of examinations. Like, they had to have a psychology test, and they had to go through different other types of mental tests. And I know in the story they were talking about a woman who was named Sharon, who somebody had told one of the people that was picking who was a part of the CIA that they think that she should be monitored. And then he went out to lunch with her, and then the next day she was cut because they said that she had too many mental issues. So I think it's good that they're like cutting down on all that, and they're very, very specific on what they wanted, what could be a part of the CIA and what couldn't.
I think the thing with the lie detector test, and he touched on it quite a bit, is a point often made with lie detectors. It's not a pass or fail type thing. The lie detector test is a system to evaluate someone, and the main goal of it is for the person administering the test to figure out what's going on in the person's mind. It's not a you're telling the truth or you're not. It's more how you react to the tough questions that's important, and we see the CIA using this to vet out people who they don't think are stable enough to be in the CIA.
I found the vetting process extremely interesting because it is so in-depth, because it is so rigorous. It's basically the only part of the book that I felt actually lived up to the whole movie hype of what an actual spy or the CIA is because it is in-depth. It is looking for that emotional response or analyzing every aspect of a person, because the information that they're going to have is classified and it's sensitive, and they need people who are solidified in their mental health and their physical health. It goes through the entire process of a human, which I think is very interesting and could be intimidating for the diverse people that we saw rush in after 9/11, as from lawyers to NFL players, how they handle that kind of situation because they haven't been prepped their whole life. They're just normal humans.
He made this interesting statement. He said that Al-Qaeda uses techniques like the CIA. And so I thought that was sort of an oddity. I hadn't quite thought of it that way, but that you were then having this sense of awareness of how your enemy acts and functions, and that you're trying to almost be like them at times. And so as a result, they said they use many of the same methods as national intelligence organizations. And then he went on, Osama bin Laden managed to purchase the leadership of Afghanistan by opening his wallet. Al-Qaeda is a worldwide organization. And so that notion of spend money, I guess, wisely or hopefully.
I thought it was very interesting when they brought up Al-Qaeda and how they use techniques like the CIA, because when you're dealing with your enemy, you definitely don't want them to know your next move or know what you're about to do. So I thought that was very alarming to read that in the story, because you don't want to act like your enemy. And yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Well, there have been terror attacks before 9/11, but the main problem with the way the CIA and the general public and the politicians reviewing organizations like Al-Qaeda is as a bunch of extremist yokels, don't know what they're doing, they're crazed, they're unintelligent, they just want to fly planes into buildings. But what the very rude awakening to that is discovering that Al-Qaeda is actually very well funded, very well connected. A lot of very intelligent people are a part of that terror group, and it's very hard to fight against a group where they are operating on the same level as you, as the Americans found out. Al-Qaeda is very capable. They were able to get people fake IDs, fake passports, set up NGOs, non-governmental organizations as covers, And it was things like this that made it so hard to adapt to the new environment that 9/11 happened on our watch.
I agree. I think the reason the author so pointedly want to bring out Al-Qaeda is that when they replicate this intelligent organization is because a lot of people have the misconception that these organizations that are terrorists outside of our country are very lackadaisical, they're not put together, they're very non-formated, but for these we kind of learned that Al-Qaeda is very well developed. They have the ability to give people false identities and corner jobs, and I think that awakening comes after this post 9/11 when they joined the CIA and they found this out. I think the general public doesn't understand that.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of people didn't, and that's what the book is trying to point out, that there's sort of a conscious awareness suddenly after 9/11, and you're trying to get caught up on maybe how you didn't take seriously developments that are occurring in the world around us. You brought up Moses, non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and so he was referring to that. He goes, NGOs have become a growing problem for the United States in the past couple of years. There are a multitude of them, and he goes on and talks about that there's a multitude of these, and then he was saying a lot of them were front organizations, so you saw them use the term charity, but that wasn't really what they were, and so as a result then they began to try to recruit people or put up various activities beyond recruitment or charity or charitable status, and so as a result, and I see that weaving through the book, this reference to NGOs. And so I think sort of them trying to grasp and understand, how do we understand these types of organizations, and how do we deal with them, and how do we identify them if they're having a front. And so as a result, you sort of get a sense of what he'd be doing once he leaves the entire training process of the CIA.
Yeah, the book constantly refers to NGO, and it also stated clearly that Osama bin Laden was an effective user of NGO, and they, as you already pointed out, that it's a charitable organization. And it was also interesting, which I already knew prior to reading this book, that the attack on America during the 9/11, like 3 of those people had degrees from American colleges and universities. Like, these people were thoroughly trained, and like Moses stated earlier about people coming over and they have their they get fake IDs and social security numbers and different things like that. So it's, even though it's alarming, it's very interesting how, these people that attacked America, they knew all about us because they were able to, live the life that we live, and they got their degrees and stuff like that.
Right. I think another misconception, a more recent one about terrorists, is that the reason they're committing terrorism is because they've grown up in economically unstable environments, and they've been forced into terrorism, and they're really the victims of American imperialism and things like that. This isn't true in the vast majority of cases. Most of the terrorists, as she pointed out, were very well educated, very well connected financially. I think Osama bin Laden was a doctor. So a lot of the narratives we have here at home don't match the reality that we see overseas. One of the reasons bin Laden was so effective is because he had non-governmental agencies all over the world, in places like Turkey, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and these organizations were used as a front to give money to the governments there. So they had an incentive to protect essentially terrorist organizations, and this made it very hard to fight terror before and after 9/11.
I think something that the book actually had a difficulty doing was separating these radicals from the general population of multiple these countries. I think a lot of times he was talking about these and he would relate it back to, like, this is completely representative of Islam and how it represents that. And I think he kind of, whether on purpose or not, continued the notions that we have in the general public. Like, he did kind of reveal to us a lot about Al-Qaeda and terrorist organizations and the 9/11 bombers and things like that, but I think he also kind of continued on these negative stereotypes that we have about these cultures in these areas, which I found kind of turned me off the book a little bit, because I would rather have it for the facts rather than generalizations.
Well, I think he gave the facts pretty well. An interesting story, or I say interesting, very horrific story, was a gang rape in Pakistan that they learned about as part of the CIA. A girl, she committed an honor crime, which is an idea of Islam. She dated outside of her clan, And the village got together and decided the appropriate response was to rape this girl. And the whole village was aware, and many of them watched it and didn't do anything. And part of the reason that he was so angry with the CIA, at least further on, is because they wouldn't let him learn about Islam. They wouldn't give him the training because they didn't want to discriminate against a religion. And he thought this was ridiculous. It's the political correctness that a lot of people view political correctness as just an idea. Really, there's real life casualties to political correctness. And if we have this handicap on how we understand a religion, we're not going to be able to ever understand the things that come from it, like terrorism, like extremism. And we need everything possibly in order to make sure that these extremist ideologies don't end up killing any more people than they already have.
I don't think it's an issue of political correctness, and I don't think there's a cap on learning about Islam. We have a class at Lindenwood where you can learn about it.
I'm talking about the CIA.
I know, the CIA is at fault because they need to be training these people, but the idea behind the
but they're
Pakistan
not
thing,
because of their view
it's
of
not
Islam
political
as
correctness.
just a religion. That is
It's
political correctness.
monopolizing the situation. In fact, the author actually monopolized the situation for his own benefit to get in touch with one of his female coworkers and someone he was romantically interested in. He saw this issue and he's like, oh, I could talk to her about this and make her have that emotional response. So if anything, he's monopolizing a situation that's already tragic.
Yeah, the Pakistan situation was very odd when it came up.
Can I speak on the situation? Because you brought up, Moses brought up the gang rape in Pakistan, but I don't think you stated what happened correctly. It was a boy that was dating a girl from another tribe. I think that's a tribal court is what they call it. And they didn't rape the girl that he was dating. The girl that he was dating was at a higher rating than him, and they raped his sister. And the little boy was 11 and his sister was 18, and that's who got gang raped, his older sister who had nothing to do with the situation.
Well, it's an odd situation that when I was reading that, I was trying to figure out what did the CIA, when learning this for the CIA, but then what they think they're going to do about it. Mm-hmm. And I think it's sort of, he brings it up as a story to give you a sense of trying to understand a different culture, but then sort of also makes you feel frustrated. Well, there's nothing that can be done about it. And I think that was sort of one of the reasons that might have been reason why he brought it up.
I agree. There is a sense of ethnocentrism when we're looking at other cultures and other religions. A lot of people want to compare it to yours, which is what ethnocentrism is. You look at your personal beliefs or your morals or your culture or religion, and then you compare outsides to that. And that's a very difficult thing to do in our world. We have so many diverse cultures and they're not very comparable. But the issue that I had with this is that he wasn't addressing the issue because he was frustrated and he wanted to change anything. He was frustrated, but then he used the situation. He basically commercialized the situation to get the attention of someone else that he wanted to reach out to. So he took that emotional response and he used it to his own benefit, which actually made me dislike this author because of it.
Well, I think we're often misled to believe that this sort of thing happens on the fringe of countries in the Middle East, when that's not often true. This is generally mainstream in a lot of these countries. Pakistan, for instance, 50% of Pakistani Muslims said they grieved when Osama bin Laden was killed. And 83% of Pakistani Muslims say that the appropriate response to a woman who cheats on her husband, commits adultery, is to stone her. So I think you can say this is ethnocentrism and say this is cultural discrimination, and you might be right. But I think we have to realize that some cultures around the world are rape cultures. They're cultures that have normalized the process of rape. And we need to be very careful about how we deal with people like this. And who we bring into the country and who we enlist in our intelligence activities.
It is, but not understanding a culture and not understanding the ramifications of a culture. You just can't assimilate all this. First, the statistics are based on a small survey of Pakistani Muslims, which doesn't envelop the whole country,
several
Islam.
thousand.
And the idea behind it is if we're talking
survey.
about a rape culture, the United States has a rape culture issue. We just saw what the Kavanaugh cases.
I don't know if I'd even use the terminology rape culture. I mean, it certainly was odd that their idea of justice was that you should rape someone, and you're thinking, that's the only option you come up with, that you're thinking. I'm reading that and I'm thinking, what other things could you have done besides that? She's dating, just send her to school to spend it, it's sort of like detention after school, and that you say you do your confessional in a Catholic church and they just tell you to go do 12 extra Hail Marys, and I'm thinking, I'm reading this and thinking it seems like a rather extreme situation, that something is all they're doing is dating, and that's the level of response you go to. And I'm sure that's what they were trying to process as they're understanding this, is that you go from 0 to 100 in an accelerated pace, and there's nothing that in between. And so that was sort of an odd thing, but I thought that was why they were bringing it up, was to sort of say, here's something we've learned, and we're trying to grasp a different culture because we're going to have to deal with them, because the book is trying to show you how to recruit people, how to blend in, how to find information, how to mingle in different situations and get this information. And here you're sort of being aware that you might be well out of place because the cultural difference is so weird that it's difficult to fathom. Why would you go from 0 to a 100 and not find other steps in between?
All right, well, as you pointed out, it's a cultural thing. This wouldn't happen in America for the reason that our culture has, for the most part, put this sort of a very, very loose view of the seriousness of rape behind us. There's a lot of problems. There's a lot of problems about rape on college campuses, but that's generally a small subset of the whole culture at large. Whereas in other countries, this sort of thing is mainstream. And the main question we have to ask ourselves is what about our allies? Pakistan, the country this happened, is an ally of the U.S.'s. And one of the questions he asks is how can we rationalize being friends with a country that is okay with this sort of thing? And I think that's a very good question to ask.
Just to get back to some of the aspects of the book, a lot of it takes place at a place called the Farm. They're not going to tell you where it is, but I thought it was interesting that, so while this is a training facility for CIA officers, you also bring in their families. And so he talks about bringing in the families because the families are going to have to be part of your business, that you're really going to have to look at this as a 24-hour-a-day job. So as a result, the idea of sort of disassociating a CIA officer from the idea of your family, it won't work. So they've learned that you have to integrate the two of them. And so you end up, he's mingling with kids that are playing at the farm, and then you're having all sorts of other skills. They're trying to learn how to talk to somebody without raising suspicion, how to realize that on a movie they talked about the idea of how you have a tail in a movie, and you always have in the movie they're saying lose them, whereas in the book they're saying don't lose them. Do the reverse. No, you want to know where they are at all times, so don't lose them. And so it was little interesting vignettes like this that he talked about.
I think, yeah, he did an excellent job at kind of explaining how it's an all-encompassing situation. When you are in the CIA and you're joining this organization, it's not just a job and then you go home to your wife and live a normal life. It's your entire life is encompassed by this. You hide your existence nearly completely, or you have cover jobs or cover identities. And he does a good explanation of that. I think it's insane how much work and how thorough these lifestyles have to be. Every little detail of their life is kind of controlled by their career, and I think that might have been a shock factor to these people, as we discussed, the average layman that were joining the CIA and going through this process. They were very capable, very adept, but the culture shock for them had to be insane.
Yeah.
Back to your initial statement about the form, when I was reading that, I actually kind of got confused because they were saying that not every CIA agent believed in it. Like, if you haven't been there before, then you did not believe that the form actually existed. They actually referred to it as a haunted house, so that threw me off. But I know they said that it was a training location, so I was like, is it a haunted house training location and you got your family there? Like, what's really going on in the form?
It sounded to me like it was obviously a big facility because they were talking about the origins of it, and that this entire facility at once was owned by a different federal agency, and somehow there was something wrong with the bookkeeping, and through the bookkeeping process that went haywire, then the CIA acquired it from some other federal agency. So they didn't want to name who it was because I guess they felt that would lead to some sense of awareness of where people would be able to find it. But I'm trying to figure out, well, if you're having your kids there, I can't imagine this is something that would stay hidden forever. So, but you know, he's doing a lot of training from the idea of, I get the feeling he's leaving a lot out. Okay, I mean, he wanted to make it a human touch book, but I was thinking, okay, so they're saying we're going to act like we're at a party. How do you have a conversation with somebody at a party, and how do you meet them so that you can hold this conversation? And we're trying to teach you how to drive down the road. They make reference to trying to teach them something about using weapons, but at the same time, I was thinking it seemed just like a lot of stuff was left out. Okay.
I definitely think it'd be interesting to see his first original manuscript, to see if they made him cut things out that were a little too top secret. But I think it's an interesting book because it does kind of delve you into the background and the underlying secrets of it without giving you the information that would kind of infringe on theirs. But I think it's kind of fascinating if you're interested in learning about the little things behind it. You just aren't going to see the full picture.
Yeah. This we only have a few minutes left, so what do you think of this book?
I thought the book was good, and I would definitely recommend other people to read it. When I initially went into reading this book, I considered CIA people to be agents, but in reading this book, I learned that that is not true, that the CIA, they're not agents, that the FBI employs agents, but the CIA employs officers. Yeah. And it was a significant, but it was small, but like a significant differences. And I just thought that, like speaking on the CIA and telling us like how they get picked and all that stuff it was very interesting.
I thought it was a powerful personal narrative. 9/11 was a rough time in our country's history. I do think most of this book is really about stepping up to the plate at a time when your country needs you. I think, like you said, a lot of information was left out, but I think a lot of information was left in. And I think general, ordinary people would benefit a lot from a book like this.
I agree. I definitely think the average layman who doesn't know much about the situation or the politics behind it would enjoy this book. It's an easy read. Overall, I didn't care for the book, but I definitely think it's one that people should read.
Yeah, I found it a quick read. I think I understood why he was trying to bring up the idea of diverse people coming into the agency, obviously older than somebody just out of college. He had that little story about scuba diving, and that some agent was looking at a training. It's taking place, I think it was in London, and people were learning how to use certain scuba diving equipment, and he was the one that was saying, wait a second, I do scuba diving. They're using the wrong type of basic equipment, and having scuba dive myself, I knew what he was talking about there, thinking I never trained on any of that, you know, when I went and started to do scuba diving. And he has some very specialized things where the water bubbles are not going to the surface, so that as a result you wouldn't see them. And so yeah, I think he was trying to use that as a vignette story to just give you this feeling. But it's a quick read. It gives you a sense of how you sort of make a transition from, let's say, civilian to CIA. So you might enjoy the book. Thank you for joining us today.